Hi, and welcome to one of the discipleship.org intensives. My name is Steve McCoy. I'm a pastor of a local church in Sarasota, Florida called the 360 Church and author of the Small Circle Tools. I'm really excited about this conversation. I've been in ministry for about 40 years. There's been so many conversations about the concepts of disciple making, the philosophy, the ideology of disciple making, and all of those are fine to have. But I am a very practical person because I do believe that everyday people are the champion of disciple making. Today, our conversation centers around this topic: how to make disciple making the core mission of your local church, not just a program on the outside or one of many programs like an item on the Cheesecake Factory menu, but how do you make it the very heartbeat of what you do? So this conversation, I believe, especially for pastors and leaders, is really key. There are three things that we're going to focus on that I believe really matter. Leadership matters, strategy matters, and outcomes matter. And so we're going to begin with leaders because I think we would all agree that as leaders, we have more impact on the complexion of our local church than we might want to own or maybe even that we realize. Because as we've trained around the world, what we've noticed is that if the senior leadership is not passionate about disciple making, it will rarely be at the core of the mission of that local church. So a few points to make here that are under this umbrella about leadership. Leadership matters because as leaders, we often shape the definition of success in our local churches. So if we are in front of our people on a Sunday morning and we're celebrating this new building or this new program or a new activity, then people think those are the things that are important. So as leaders, I do believe that it is very, very critical for us to realize that we do shape the definition of success in our local churches. If we are celebrating life change and relational depth and disciple making, then that will flow right to the everyday people of our church. Here's a second point for leadership. I believe that as leaders, if we're going to have disciple making at the very core mission of our church, we have to fight the expert culture. That means that we have just a chosen few who know more than the other people, and that the spotlight is on them. If we're going to have a movement or a culture of disciple making in our church, we must involve everyday people at the grassroots level. And we have to share the power. It's like Exodus chapter 18, when Jethro came to Moses and said, man, you're doing it all by yourself. You've got to spread it out. Acts chapter 8, verse 1. All were scattered except the apostles. I think this jazzes the heart of God when everyday people get involved. We have to readjust the appetite of our people because we live in such a consumeristic culture that we have to say, this is not about you consuming and receiving, but it really is about you getting in the game. So we have to fight against that expert culture. Finally, in Ephesians chapter 4 and 11 and 12, the responsibility for leaders is to equip God's people for the work of the ministry. So as leaders, if we're going to equip the people, then we have to give them equipment. There are many different tools to the approach of discipleship, but far too often we leave disciple making up to chance, that by random people are just going to do it by nature, and that's not the case very often. So as leaders, we must shift our thinking, shift the definition of success, and help the everyday people be the champion and get involved. I want you to hear from a pastor in Texas. This is a guy who's been using our small circle tools, but I want you to listen to the shift of thinking that took place in his heart and mind in order to make disciple making the core mission of their local church. Let's take a look.
There's obviously several big challenges in trying to take a church down a discipleship path. For our church, we face some big hurdles in transforming the church back to the original model of Christ. And I think for us, it began with winning the hearts of the leadership. I called them together and I asked them, would you begin to read some of the things that the pastoral staff is reading? So the leaders agreed to begin reading with us as we read books like Discipleship, The Invested Life by Joel Rosenberg. We begin to see what the church had lost. We had lost really the mission of Christ, or you might even say the method of Christ, how he did his ministry through disciples. And once we had then discipled leaders who were ready to take their own disciples, now we were ready to take it to the congregation. Once we got to that point, though, we had a very systematic approach to dealing with the sermons for a 6-month period. And we preached heavily from the Gospels. We just said to the congregation, during these next few months, allow us to speak from the heart, from our platform here. And we want to catch the church congregation up on something we've been talking to the leaders about. As we begin to talk that way in front of the church, the light bulbs begin to go off. The understanding was there. The Holy Spirit was working in our own congregation now to bring everyone to enlightenment. You have to understand, if you're trying to find the mission of Christ, the Holy Spirit's going to aid in that endeavor. And he began to illuminate the hearts of our people and give them a passion for not only being disciples, but understanding that making disciples was going to be the mission of our church because it was the mission of Jesus Christ.
Man, I love that. I just get so jazzed by pastors that get it, that really have redefined success, that prioritize, that equip the people in their church for disciple making being at the core of what they're doing. Not only does leadership matter, but here's the second thing, strategy matters. In other words, with everyday people, they need a clear path to understand how to do disciple making. So if, and so many circumstances and cultures that we see within local churches, disciple making is just left to random. They're left to chance, that it's just going to happen one way or the other, but that is rarely the case, especially if it's going to be the core of your local church. So strategy matters. First of all, we have to deprogram. There are so many choices that we have in our culture. I don't know if you just pick an item in the grocery store, toothpaste, paper towels, and stand in that aisle of the store, and in that aisle you'll see so many choices. Well, I'm going to tell you, as a pastor, and we planted our church 14 years ago, we have had to say no to so many things. Not only that, do you have to deprogram, but you have to keep a careful eye on your schedule. What is the schedule that you're allowing empty parking spaces for disciple making to take place? If the schedule and the itinerary and the activities are so overloaded, then rarely is there room for disciple making. Here's something that is a touchy subject. Let's talk about finances. I believe that a budget will reflect whether or not disciple making is at the core of the church. If our finances and our resources are being poured into so many different areas and being dissipated over so many different dimensions of our church, I do believe that you will not see disciple making at the core. Our church is about 14 years in the making, and over that time, we have spent probably over $1 million in disciple making and disciple making tools. Our tools are in over 70 countries and 35 languages, but even within our own community and our own local church, we have invested greatly into disciple making. So it may be that you want to take some inventory. Finally, in regards to strategy mattering, I do believe that it has to be visible. Disciple making has to be a visible part of the operating system of the local church. In other words, if people come in and they have to guess if you have discipleship or not, then it probably will not be at the heartbeat of the core. So that disciple-making pathway has to be very, very clear. So leadership matters, strategy matters, finally, outcomes matter. Outcomes matter because when people see tangible evidence of life change and relational depth in other people within the local church, you won't be able to hold them back. In other words, we must take inventory and ask ourselves, is the approach that we're taking to disciple making, is it really making a tangible difference where people notice? My wife and I have probably 4 or 5 favorite restaurants in our city. And I was thinking about that in each of those restaurants, we never went the first time without someone telling us, oh man, you got to go to that restaurant. And I do believe that disciple making is the same. We have seen over the past years of disciple making and having it at the core of our local church so much life change that people ask, how can I be a part of that? How can I get involved? And I do believe that's very important. Finally, I do believe the outcomes matter in the way that we communicate and celebrate. Nearly every Sunday of our church, I stand at the front and we celebrate people in disciple making. We have their picture up on the screen and we applaud that. And so the things that we celebrate are the things that we replicate. We're going to have a conversation about these items and more of how to practically make disciple making the very core of your local church. Thanks for joining us and hope this conversation is exciting for you and helpful for you. God bless you guys.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Bobby Harrington, and I get the privilege of leading this wonderful conversation on how Jesus-style disciple making is the core mission of the local church. Really appreciate what Steve just had to share with us. And in just a moment, I'm going to introduce Steve and Justin and Alex. But before I do that, I'd like to just set the stage in this session that we're having together today, which we are working our way through the 10 affirmations of disciple making that we think are the key affirmations for a disciple making movement. Today, the affirmation focuses on the local church, and we believe that the core mission of the local church is disciple making, and that's significant. So here's what we mean by that. We believe the local church is the primary environment for disciple making. In other words, God's plan A to redeem the world is disciples and disciple making in a local church context. The church is for discipleship, and then disciples manifest the kingdom of God to the world. When churches reverse this process and primary attempts are to get the world into the church instead of the church going into the world, we get chaos. So we believe that pastoral ministerial work should be evaluated and rewarded based on how many disciple makers are produced and the kind of people that a church sends into the world. So as Jesus was a man for others, the church likewise is for others. So the key thing is that any plan that makes disciples, it must make disciples who live for others and carry on the mission of Jesus. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to get into that. Steve McCoy is the founder and director of Small Circle. He's also a senior pastor of a Church 360 church, and he's a longtime partner of discipleship.org. So Steve, welcome.
Thank you, my friend.
So glad to have you here for our conversation.
Good. Glad to be here.
Justin Gravitt is with us. And Justin has been an integral part of discipleship.org as well. He is a leader with Navigator Church Division. And I've had many conversations with Justin about disciple making. In fact, we are in the next couple of weeks releasing an ebook that Justin has written for us on disciple making in a local church and the culture. And Justin also, I've asked him to introduce for us his friend and coworker, Alex Mehta. Justin, introduce us to Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Bobby. It's good to be with you guys. Steve, good to be with you as well. Alex is a friend of mine, colleague in Los Angeles. Alex Mehta has been on staff with the Navigators for quite a while with the Navigators Church Ministries for the past 6 years. And he's also done a lot with our Hispanic network, La Vida, and lavidanetwork.org. For any Latinos watching today, we are really committed to ministering diversely, and Alex has been a leader for that with us. So we're glad to have him today.
Oh, that's great.
Thank you, Justin.
I want to ask everybody who's joined with us to join the chat box. We're going to try to interact with some of the questions that you're raising. We have one of our team members who is monitoring the chat box, and he's sending me some of the questions. We've already got quite a few here, so appreciate that. I'd like to begin by asking Justin to react to what Steve just presented to us.
Yeah. I love Steve's video. I had the privilege to check it out a few minutes before, but one of the things that stood out to me, Steve, about what you said was this idea of everyday people, right? That so often when we think about church, and especially as church leaders, we're thinking macro, right? We're thinking systems, we're thinking processes, but the reality and the way that we need to evaluate all that we're doing is how are we impacting the everyday person in the pew? Are they getting it that disciple making is for them? It's not just for the professionals, not just for the experts. It's for everyday people who are in the church, who are new to the faith. It's for people who have been in the faith for decades. And are they getting that? And are they getting it to the point where they believe that they can do it? Because I know, as just a church member, really, I mean, I'm not a pastor, but as a church member, I know the struggle that so many face in living out their faith in the natural rhythms of their life. And I really think that's what disciple making is about. And I love how, Steve, you drew that out in that piece.
Oh, that's good. Hey guys, I want to start with a question from Joel in the chat box, because I think it gets at something I want us to tackle straight up front. He says, wouldn't the home be plan A? In other words, when it comes to making disciples, isn't the home plan A? So I want to say something about that, and then you guys react to, because I've had the privilege of working a lot on this topic over the years. I've written a book on, Jim Putman and I wrote Disciple Shift, which is shifting a church to discipleship. And then my son and I and a man named Jason Hauser wrote a book on discipling kids in the home. One of the things I like to say is the Great Commission before the Great Commission is Deuteronomy 6, where parents are told to teach their children the commands of God. So I just want to say this as we begin, that both are important, but the primary place a lot of people learn about how the home should be is the church. And a lot of people are single. In fact, do you know that the majority of Americans are not married? The majority of American adults now are not married. So, there's a sense in which you don't want to pick between the two. But in the scheme of God, and this is contrary to American individualism, the church is a big deal. The church is where families learn how to disciple their kids. The church is where singles are included in disciple making. And although I think it's a good point, I just want to keep coming back and saying, disciple making in the local church is a big deal. So I'm going to let you guys react to me.
One of the things, I think it's a great question, and it's obviously relevant for many people, but as you point out, not for everyone. If you're single, if you're widowed, divorced, etc. And so I think I'll say something that I'm going to go on a little bit of thin ice here, saying, I think my observation as a pastor is that the answer is absolutely. We're discipling our kids, but the great thing about the church is a village, it's a tribe, and I've noticed in my own kids, I have two boys, one is 16, one is 17, that I do partial discipling with them. the leaders that are within the local church, sometimes they have a greater voice than sometimes we do. Or maybe to be safe, I'll say an additional voice. So of course it's happening in the home. However, I will say that there are sometimes I do see that it can be easy to hide behind that concept of saying, hey, I'm bringing up my kids, I'm raising my kids. That's it for disciple making. And I think you have to be careful on both ends of that. But it truly is a balance.
Alex, how about you? How do you react to that?
Well, as a Latino, I think of familia, and I am an elder in a bilingual Baptist church, and we see that the need to have a tight family core. But absolutely, you're right when it comes to the church being the main agent of making disciples. Because in a home, you still could have non-believing children, and doesn't necessarily mean that they're embracing the faith and that they're truly being discipled. You're trying to win them over for Christ in those families. But we know in the local church, technically, we should have believers coming together. It can be a place of seeking the Lord, but if we're discipling in our core congregation, then we'll see disciples being made because they're committed at all levels, from children all the way to the seniors.
No, that's good. Okay, guys, I want to jump into something here. This contention that the core mission of the local church is disciple making, I just want to punctuate it. I believe it, but I didn't always believe that. Okay. And in fact, a big part of, I don't even know why I'm talking about the book. That's not intentional. But when we wrote the book Disciple Shift in 2013, one of the things that I had to do is I had to spend a lot of time in 2010, 2011, and 2012 reading the New Testament. In fact, I read through multiple times, I read through the entire New Testament with this question in my mind, and that is disciple making really the core mission of the local church? I had been influenced by different books on what is the purpose of the church. Rick Warren in the 90s wrote a book called The Purpose-Driven Church, and he says there's 5 purposes of the church, and quote, he said discipleship is like number 4. You've got outreach, worship, fellowship, what he called discipleship, which there was really education and ministry. And so the contention that, really the heart down here is Jesus-style disciple making. Now, I've got to say that Steve Gladden was a part of one of our earlier webinars, and he agrees with that actually disciple making is the core. It expresses itself through worship and these other things. But I want to ask you guys to weigh in on biblically, why is that true? This is the pregnant pause where you jump in.
Right. Yeah.
I think when we return to Jesus, right? So Jesus is our example for life and ministry. And so when we return to him and look at what he did, he laid a foundation, and that foundation was disciple making through not just individuals, but he made a team that formed the foundation of the church. And so, when Jesus went about making a church, planting a church, he did it through disciple making, and it didn't stop once the church was planted. It continued and formed everything that the church did from there out. And so I think we have lost that so much in our culture. We believe that we can thrive as a church with a foundation other than Jesus-style disciple making. And I don't know biblically where we get that, because I don't think it's there.
Yeah. So let me just summarize your argument, and then Alex, I want you to jump in next. What you're saying, Justin, is that when we look at Jesus, what did Jesus do? Jesus focused on disciple making. So at least at square one, we want to say we want to do what Jesus did. That's it. Alex, jump in here. I'm going to stay on this for a second because this is crucial. Alex?
Yes. When I think about the core of the church being disciple making, we're really talking about following Christ and being Christ-like. And to me, there is where the church is empowered and called to do. and the Great Commission was go make disciples, but in what context? Throughout the world, we want to go in the communities, we want to reach the lost, we want to do those things. But the engine, the house that God has created for us to nurture, to build up the saints and equip them is the local church. And so when I think about disciple making, I think, what am I trying to do is help people walk with Jesus, to be like Christ and to make him known. And there is where we do that in a incubator to a certain degree, but at the same time, a house that allows people to see us as followers of Christ.
That's good. Steve, go ahead and jump in, and then I want to take it one level deeper.
Sure, man. I even think that when you look in the Old Testament, that you see a God that continually is urging us and charging us to multiply. And so there are some, as we know, activities in the church don't necessarily multiply. They can, but they can become more consumeristic. They can become more cul-de-sac in nature. And disciple making, the very heartbeat of disciple making, is really being aligned with a very creative, multiplying God. And so it's no doubt that, when Moses spoke or God spoke to Adam and Eve, and God spoke to Noah and the Great Commission, it's all a multiplying force. And I believe that is the heartbeat. Why would it be any different in the church that God would change that heartbeat?
Oh, that's good. I agree with all that. Steve, one of the questions we're getting in the chat box, I'm going to tell you what it is. We're going to come back to it. What caused you to make this shift as a senior pastor? So before you answer that, though, I'm going to take the opportunity to jump in here. Obviously, I'm quite passionate about this, and I'm passionate because I spend a lot of time on it. So I read through the Bible again, and I said to myself, bottom line, what does God want? God made us. He wants a relationship with us. He wants an eternal relationship with us. But, okay, what is the shape of that? And the shape of that is he sent Jesus to rescue us so that we would place our faith in Jesus, which in the Bible, faith is allegiance, loyalty, faithfulness. So we're going to put Jesus at the center of our lives for salvation, but not just salvation, for life. N.T. Wright, actually, the New Testament scholar in England, has this great line about it in the research I did, that really behind everything, what's going on, is the New Testament wants everybody to trust and follow Jesus. As I was reading through it, and I said to myself, really, every book in the New Testament at the end of the day is wanting us to form our lives around the person of Jesus, to trust him, to follow him. How are husbands supposed to be? Well, husbands are supposed to love their wives the way Christ loved the church. Okay, how are we supposed to be in our work? What if we're slaves in Colossians? How's a slave to work? Oh, a slave is to work like he's working for Jesus and to replicate the life of Jesus. How are people to act in the local church? Well, we're supposed to love like Jesus. Behind everything, it comes down to we're forming our lives around the person of Jesus. That is the core mission of the church. And what is that? It's disciple making. Mm-hmm. So Paul says in Colossians, he strives at the end of Colossians chapter 1 to present everyone mature in Christ. Mm. When Paul's in prison, what's he saying? I just want Christ to be exalted in my body. Mm. So at the end of the day, we just want, in the power of God, that the local church, and I just want to encourage everybody, there is a free ebook if you want to pursue this more, because I do think it's a critical question for pastors. You've got to be convinced in your bones that it's about helping people at the end of the day be disciples of Jesus, to form their lives around Jesus for salvation and life here and now, and then and there. Mm-hmm. So Steve, tell us about your transition to that.
It's actually an easy answer for me. In fact, I had just opened up Colossians 1, 28, 29 because that is the passion that Paul had. He said, to this end, I strive. He's put a lot of effort in teaching, admonishing, disciple making. So my story goes back to the early 80s because I was studying to be a concert pianist, believe it or not. And
yes, you were. How many hours a day did you work at that?
8 hours a day, man. 7 days a week, 364 a year. I was, if you're playing at that level, you got to play in the game. So there was a trumpet player that shared Christ with me. And long story short, I came into a church where it was a very multi-ethnic church. The pastor was from India. And because of his cultural background, disciple making was natural. He invited me into his apartment building to live. I had a roommate there. Once a week, I was invited up to his apartment flat to have dinner with his wife and his 2 small kids. And after dinner, we'd go into a study. And I was in a group. I was, because of my music background, automatically in the worship service. But for me, that table for 2 became a safe place. So it wasn't only I was learning and I was absorbing at a different level, almost like being tutored, so to speak. But he was disciple me. He was a disciple maker. I didn't know anything about the church culture whatsoever. It was so life impacting that, my joke is that I thought you guys as Christians were like AA. You sign up and you get a sponsor. I just thought that was the operating system of the church. And so when I went from there, changed gears, went to seminary, changed gears, went to another city, it was shocking to me that the intentionality of disciple making was absent. And so for us, we didn't make a shift in our church. We planted the church with the very dream. It was an experiment. Could we, and really back then, the only guys I knew were doing disciple making, to my knowledge, I'm not saying we're the only guys, we're Navigators. And because they've been around for decades. And so when we planted the church, I held tightly to Tom Rainer's book, Simple Church.
Yeah.
Because, when you plant a church, man, everybody comes out of the woodwork and they've got a gajillion ideas about so many programs and this, that, and the other. And I held the line and say, I don't care if we're a church of 30 or 3,000, disciple making is going to be at the core. It's going to be the core mission of our church. So it really was born out of my own experience and passion about the absence of disciple making in the local church.
Steve, that's so good. As Steve and Justin, but just for everybody watching this, I planted a church. I live right now just outside Nashville, and in a suburb of Nashville, basically called Franklin. And we planted a church, and it wasn't built around Jesus-style disciple making, and we had to change the DNA, which was incredibly painful. Mm-hmm. I think at the end of the day, it's very much about strategy, but even deeper than that, it's going to be about culture. So we're trying to create a culture of disciple making. Now, Jeff has a question. I want to read this to you guys from the chat box because it's a really good question. He says, how do you respond to the lead pastor who thinks everything we do is discipleship? For example, sermon serving, it's a part of the strategy. And I want to add to why this is such a good question. So we did a national study with a statistical expert that cost a lot of money. And it was a study of disciple making in churches in the United States. And it's a statistically valid study of a representative of 1,000 churches, 1,000 pastors. You know how they do it so that it's a good reflection. And here's the number one result of this study. And by the way, it's a free download on discipleship.org. Those of you who are a part of this master class, also, that's a part of the package in the master class. But here's the results of that study. And it's a fresh study. We released it earlier this year. In churches, the biggest problem is that church leadership says everything is discipleship. Everything is disciple making. Now, there's a certain sort of general sense in which there's truth in that. but everything is not Jesus style disciple making. And when everything is disciple making or discipleship, here's the adage: when everything is something, then ultimately nothing is
Right.
that. And the biggest problem, less than 5% of churches would be disciple making churches. When you use simple metrics about how Jesus made disciples, there's just simple ones there. So Alex, I'd like you to respond to that. How do you help somebody in what you're doing with the Navigators when everything's discipleship, which means too often nothing is Jesus style disciple making?
Yeah, I think back to the earlier comment when you said you planted a church and you had to kind of replant the DNA. A part of the structure is, again, the pastors. Most churches are small, in general. It's a pastor doing everything, and the pastor who may not even have a core team of leaders that help him. Again, you could say, I have a deacon committee or I have an elder board, but reality is the pastor is trained in how to perform certain tasks as a pastoral ordinance or calling. And the challenge, again, is how do you move a pastor into a perspective that church discipleship is a team effort and it's just not him. And I think that's where I would start with most small churches, is try to help them understand that it is a team effort and that maybe you can recruit and develop a group of men and women who would really have this passion to make disciples in the local church. It just can't be the pastor alone. No,
that's right. Okay, guys, I want us to talk about some of the things that Steve said. Steve, you said something that is absolutely right. And that is, in my experience, by the way, that the senior leadership has to be passionate, and I'm going to define it again, about Jesus-style disciple making. And if the senior leadership, especially the senior minister or senior pastor, if he's not, the church is not going to be.
Right.
So, Justin, you work a lot with churches in your role. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. We're not going to have a church that has a core mission of disciple making if we don't have a pastor where that's his core mission, right? So the pastor can't just know about it. He has to do it. He can't just talk about it and celebrate it. He has to demonstrate it, right? And as I work with pastors and the rest of our team nationally works with pastors, that's probably the biggest hurdle that we hit against again and again and again. And part of the reason is pastors, they don't have training in how to do this. Most of them have gone through the seminaries and they haven't had a class. They haven't been through any sort of training. And so we start talking to them about this. And like you referenced, Bobby, we're talking different languages at first because we don't have the same definitions for the words. And so discipleship is what I call a junk drawer term. In most churches, we just throw everything in that drawer and we say, yeah, it's disciple making or discipleship. But the reality is pastors have to figure out how to do it. I'm working with a pastor now who has been learning and been hungry to learn and been pushing me forward. Like, all right, can we speed up until we got to the point where I said, okay, Pastor Jim, it's time for you. Who are you going to begin to disciple? One guy, two guys, three guys, up to you, but who is it? Oh, and then we've ground to a halt because it's one thing to learn about it. It's another thing to do it, right? And so pastors have a lot of obstacles to overcome that we really have to help them through. And part of it is an understanding problem, but a lot of it's some personal things too of, I just don't know how to walk along somebody life on life. I'm used to pastoring people and showing up for the events that they have, but I'm less used to calling somebody up and saying, hey, would you want to go out for coffee? Hey, could I come over and just hang out with your kids or watch them while you and your wife go out? So it's a lot of these challenges that we face and senior leaders, I get it. It's hard. It's really hard to make that transition. And when we do have a board, or elders or a team, they're normally not asking, Pastor, how's it going in disciple making? There's a lot of other questions that are coming, right?
So I want to get to a couple of things that I think are really crucial about this. So let me mention what they are, and then I want to pause for a second, because Justin, I want you to tell us about what the Navigator Church Division does, just so people can know about you as a resource. And Steve, I want you to tell everybody about Small Circle that way. But before we get there, I want to describe a mindset that the senior leadership has to have. And here's what it is. First of all, you got to be biblically convinced that what God wants you to do is to raise up disciples of Jesus. Not just get people saved. That is a key part of being a disciple. It's like getting saved. It's like most important part. But once you're saved, God wants you for the rest of your life to form it around Jesus. You got to be convinced of that. Secondly, then you got to be convinced that the way Jesus did it is the best way. Like Jesus' model is the perfect model. Then thirdly, you've got to say, I'm going to live that out. I'm going to do that. And again, we're mentioning a lot of resources. On the first one, we're in the chat box. People are asking. It's a free ebook. Discipleship is the core mission of the church. On the second one, on Jesus' method, Robert Coleman's book, written almost 60 years ago, The Master Plan of Evangelism. We have a ebook that you can download. It's Revisiting the Master Plan. It's 5 years ago. We interviewed him. It's the gold standard on how Jesus made disciples, which is how we should make disciples. And then we got to live it out. So, Justin, how does Navigators help people to live it out?
Yeah, so we're a team nationally of around 125 practitioners of disciple making in the local church. And so we come alongside pastors and church leaders. And the first thing we do is convince and coach, right? So just like I was sharing, just like you were sharing, Bobby, we have to be convinced that at the core of who we are, this is what God's calling us to, is to make disciples. So as a senior leader gains that vision, then we begin to help them develop a core team. And as I think Bobby mentioned in this earlier, that I've published an ebook with discipleship.org around that, the foundation of a disciple-making culture, which goes into depth on how do you develop a core team that really forms the foundation that will support the weight of a disciple-making culture in the church. So as we form that core team, then we begin to help with the culture. And, we've already been doing some of it in the team, but we help that team spread that culture, that DNA, to the rest of the church. And then we make sure that the church isn't just focused inward. We have to be focused outward, because if disciple making never reaches the lost, then I would say it's not really disciple making.
It's not
right?
Jesus
So we don't,
style.
Yeah, not Jesus style. So we don't want dead end disciple making in the church. We want disciple making that moves out into every facet of our community and our culture, and eventually into the rest of the world, because Jesus called us to reach the nations, not just our neighbors. And so we need to do both. And so that's the way we do it. Our team's made up of, everyday passionate disciple makers, former pastors. I'm a former missionary myself overseas. And so we have a wide variety of gifts that we bring to the table as we walk alongside pastors. And really we bring, a relationship to the local pastor. We're boots on the ground, and we help walk with them through this process that's really, really challenging.
That's good, Justin. By the way, there's a link to a video that Justin created that's very similar to this, and you can see that link. Steve, talk to us about Small Circle.
Yeah, man. So Small Circle is it indicates a relationship, and so for us, I think Navigators as well, we believe that groups are really important, and but we do find that within that group, or even outside that group, in addition to that group, a small circle relationship would be one that is very intentional, a Paul-Timothy relationship. And sometimes that can be a micro group, but typically one-to-one for us, that really begins to pour in. We find that as we talk about senior leadership, that many of them, as Justin appropriately said, just don't feel equipped. They don't feel ready. They don't know how. And that's a big deal for us. If everyday people are going to be involved, we have to, Ephesians 4, 11, 12, we have to equip God's people for the work of the ministry. So we, like Navigators, we have trainers all throughout the country. We're in now about 80 countries, 35 languages, and we have provided tools for everyday people to jump in. And I think it's a matter sometimes with senior leadership of trust. It's the Moses Jethro conversation where you can't do it all yourself. Sometimes our higher education almost embeds in us an expert culture. And in order to really create a culture of disciple making in our local churches, we have to let that go. We have to trust people. We have to trust people to be disciple makers and to make disciples who make disciples. And when that movement happens, man, it is absolutely exhilarating. In our church, we from 16 years old to the oldest is 92, happens to be my mom. She's on her fourth disciple. And man, when you see generations and generations of disciple making within your church, it is truly exciting, very rewarding.
Hey, you can't use your mom because nobody could say anything against somebody using their mom.
Absolutely.
I'm teasing you, but that's a pretty cool story.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to speak for a few minutes to that person who's joining us. They're a part of this masterclass and they're not the senior pastor and they're frustrated. Right now in the chat box, several people, what do I do if my senior minister, my senior pastor, they're not on board with this? And I'm going to ask Alex to jump in because Alex, you were part of the U.S. military. You were part of Navigators, I think, since 1981. I want you to speak to this, Alex, but I'm just going to preempt you by saying this. We can't change the whole world, but we can be disciples who make disciples regardless of what our senior leadership is. But Alex, speak to that.
Yeah, we want to be intentional in our efforts, and the challenge again, when you work with a pastor who may not be orientated to the way we're talking on this discussion today, is to be able to come alongside without being a threat and being an asset to him or her in that case. And so the challenge again is, how do you win a place of hearing? And the way you do that is coming with some assessments and current realities. Again, just allow them to self-assess, to grapple with the information, to ask them how things are going, and ask them if there's a better way. And then they don't see you as a threat trying to steal their sheep. Again, we as Navigators, and I'm sure the same for Steve's ministry, is that we want to come alongside in a way that is considered to be a blessing. Again, most pastors are hitting it hard and working hard, and they feel overwhelmed. And when we come to them and show that we're in a servant attitude posture as a disciple of Christ, then they're a little more open. Again, the challenge again is culture. Culture is a hard thing to change. And we come in with Jesus style disciple making, it's a culture change. And you would think, wow, the church already has, Christ in the center. Absolutely. But we kind of put our own little, adages to this stuff, and we kind of come up with our own philosophy. And sometimes in some churches that have been around for a significant amount of time, like 50 years, 30 years, again, the pastor didn't plant it, but he inherited, and this is what he got. This is what he has. And how he wants to change it, it's not that simple. So part of it is being patient and helping that pastor understand this is something that's going to take some time. It's not going to happen tomorrow. I'm not going to hand you a book and give you a little checklist and you're done. No, we really need to work at this together.
Thank you for that, Alex. I want to speak directly to that person again. I've just got another question here from John, who's asking as a lay person. He says, I found maybe 3 pastors over the last decade willing to make that change. And he's right. Most pastors aren't. Here's the reality. We developed a church culture in North America that came out of the reaction of the Protestants to the Roman Catholic ways of doing things in the 1500s. And it's this structure that's focused on church gatherings on Sunday, where somebody gets up and preaches. Okay. Now that is all good. It's just insufficient. And what we want is we want to create a church culture where everyday people are like Jesus. You know, it says in Acts chapter 4 of the apostles, it said, the Sanhedrin was surprised because they were ordinary men who had been with Jesus. And so we want ordinary, everyday disciples. The goal is to be a disciple and to make disciples. And that is a totally different culture than what 99% of people think is a church culture. And so you have a pastor in a difficulty with that, and you have people in a difficulty. So you got to change the culture. As you're changing the culture, back to the everyday disciple here. I don't even want to call him a layman, because layman is not biblical language. We're all in ministry. For a disciple, we're in ministry. Every one of us, though, we need tools, because every one of us, regardless of where we're at in life, can be a disciple who makes disciples. I tell people, can you just give 3 to 5 hours a week? Well, most people say, yeah. Well, then we want to help you to invite people into discipling relationships with you. So in terms of tools, typically the biggest barrier is, okay, I'm persuaded, tell me what to do. I had a meeting 2 days ago with a senior pastor of a church, and he's just at the end of his rope, and he held up a book on disciple making principles and all that. He said, this isn't helping. Will you please just give me a model? Mm-hmm. And so I gave him a model, and we have 30 partners with models. Steve, I'm going to just talk to us about the importance of a model or a strategy that tells the average everyday person, how do I do it?
It is absolutely essential. And because most people as pastors, we get up, we preach a message, we say, you know, it's going to focus on making disciples and becoming a disciple maker. Everybody's collectively nodding. I agree with that. I don't think people disagree, like we shouldn't be making disciples. But then we frustrate our people by saying, go and do it, without giving them a roadmap. So I believe that tools are absolutely critical to the whole success of making disciples for everyday people.
So Steve has tools. Justin, at the Navigators, you guys have tools. Again, I'm wanting to be careful here because we have like 30 partners at discipleship.org. The whole goal of discipleship.org is to fan into flames what Small Circle, what the Navigators, what the relational discipleship, what Dan Spader, Bill Hull, we want to fan into flame, and there's a lot of these tools, but I know that you know that too, Justin, how important it is. So talk to us about that in terms of your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So tools in the hands of someone who knows how to use them, right? And so what we've found is that I've gone into church and helped different pastors who have had tools from the Navigators or from other partners that are engaged with discipleship.org. And they say, yeah, I've read all about it, but I don't know how to do it. And so it really, really helps to have somebody alongside, right, that says, okay, well, let's just walk this through, right? It's saying to do this. Well, have you tried it with anybody yet? And the first step, you know, I kind of have a pocket disciple making tool that I use called the Disciple Maker's Loop. And it goes like this. Tell them what, tell them why, show them how, get them started, keep them going, help them pass it on. And so whatever the tool is, I say, okay, well, you learned what, do you know why? Okay, let's talk about why. Do you know how? Okay. Have you done it with anybody? Go share it with somebody. And the first step is like, share it. I don't care who you share it with, your wife, your kids, share it with your dog. It doesn't matter. Just share it. And then as they get into that rhythm, then they start to gain some confidence, right, with the tool, because the difference between having a tool and knowing how to use it. So yeah, that's, super important.
That's really good. So I had a guest in the chat box ask me a direct question. He goes, hi, Bobby, can you and the speakers give actual practical examples of what disciple making looks like now due to the pandemic and the quarantine, and as well as our Zoom era right now. So I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to get real explicit because I, as a senior pastor of a church, really care about, you got to make it practical. Like, call everybody to do it and give them a tool so they can do it. So I'm just going to give you a simple one that we found great effectiveness even during COVID-19. Okay. So I want to be careful not pushing personal examples, but our model, what we do is we ask people to follow the rhythms of Jesus. And so we start off with fasting and prayer, and we invite people into the group. We invite them into the group, and then what we do is we have a covenant. I'm a big believer in explicit discipling relationships. You establish the boundaries of the relationship. Like, what are we going to do? Okay, we're going to meet for at least 6 months. How often? Every week. Okay. Thirdly, what we do is we meet on Zoom every week, and once a month, even with face masks, we meet face to face, and we serve the poor once a month, or we have a meal together, or we will do something that's equivalent of experiencing the Sabbath. We give them then curriculum that's for catch this, the curriculum we use is for the everyday disciple who can then go through it and use it himself or herself with other people. You have to have curriculum that other people can use with other people who use it with other people. And so just in terms of answering explicitly to that. Listen, we're going to come back. We're going to take a brief pause here. And when we come back, I'm going to ask each of you to say if you could just give one exhortation, what would it be? So let's pause. And I want everyone to know how you can get all of this material, this master class, and all of these great sessions for your use with yourself and your team. So let's watch this clip on how to do that.
Hey guys, you can have immediate access to all the material from the Holistic Disciple Making Intensives, and you can purchase the course for personal use at a time that's best for you. It's called our Holistic Disciple Making Masterclass and Certification. And with it, you get access to all the in-depth discussions in video and in written form, online assessments, and you get discipleship.org's certification. So for more information, please click the tab below.
So as this session ends, and I found this very invigorating, thank you, each of you, for your participation. If you could end with one thing to exhort and encourage here as we end, what would it be? Alex, I'm going to start with you.
The words of Jesus, and go make disciples. You and I are about doing that, and you're on this call today, and you're trying to practice everyday lifestyle of Jesus disciple making. And the challenge, again, is not to give up, to endure, to persevere. The challenge, again, is not to quit, to not become discouraged, because the enemy is trying to discourage us, even in this COVID time right now. And we must band together as brothers and sisters in Christ to hold arm in arm that this is something that the Lord has called us to do. And by golly, we're going to do it with all our heart, soul, and mind. That's the challenge. And I want to encourage you today, keep on going.
Thank you. Justin.
Yeah, disciple making can become the mission of your church. It can. And we can decide today, you can decide today that you're going to be the key in that happening, right? By choosing to be a disciple making pastor, a disciple making leader in the church, and taking advantage of the resources that are out there with discipleship.org and the partners. But you can do it, but we have to do it by example, because being trumps knowing. And so we need to become what we hope others will become. Not just, again, we can't just delegate it, program it. We have to demonstrate it. And today you can make that decision. And my prayer is that you will.
Thank you. Steve.
You know, unfortunately, we when you're reading the Bible, it doesn't, we can't capture the emotions that are taking place when words were spoken. So when Jesus, I've always imagined when Jesus gave the Great Commission, that he had a gleam in his eye, that he was excited when he said, "Go make disciples." But it wasn't this thing that we have to do. And what I would say, my exhortation and my challenge to leaders, to those that are watching today, is don't miss the jazz. This is not something like, oh, okay, I've got to do it, and I'm really feeling guilt about it. No, you will miss the jazz when you see ripples of disciples making disciples making disciples. In our local church, we're on our 5th generation, and it is thrilling to see that. And so, man, just be excited about it and approach it with a mindset that is positive, and see the gleam in Jesus's eyes when he said, "Go make disciples."
I love the way you said, "Don't miss the jazz." Only a man with a PhD in music and a concert pianist who practiced 8 hours a day can pull that metaphor off in a great way. So thank you. Thank you, each of you, for your participation. I want to encourage everybody to join us for the final session, which is on disciple-making movements. So we look forward when we meet next time, where we have Shadonke Johnson, who leads a disciple-making movement of hundreds of thousands. Dave Ferguson, who's the president head of the Exponential Network, wrote the book Hero Maker, and Daniel M., who leads a church in Alberta, Canada, and works with new churches and has written quite a bit on disciple making. We're going to get into disciple-making movements and how creating the culture we've been talking about can become a movement that transforms many lives. Well, God bless everyone. Thank you for being with us. And we hope that you leave us from this session with a commitment to be a disciple and make disciples.